this evening, and especially thanks to the Historical Society for asking us to come by and share some history of the ferry, the Anderson Ferry. I do have several displays here. Feel free to stop and look at them. Take as much time as you like. And I have a map here of Boone County, the different ferries that have operated along the Ohio River, bordering Boone County over the past couple hundred years. Ferries have played an important part in transportation in the development of our country, America, over the last 200 years. And today there's approximately 300 ferry businesses that are still operating. Some businesses are just mom and pop businesses, small businesses, and other businesses are large ferry boats that haul several hundred trucks and cars. But when our country was first settled, there was a lot more ferries than what there are today. Of course, bridges and expansion and development have caused a lot of ferries to go by the wayside. Today, there's only 4 surviving ferries on the Ohio River. There's one at Sistersville, West Virginia, and Augusta, Kentucky, and at Constance, Kentucky, the Anderson Ferry, and there's one at Cave Rock, Kentucky, down near Paducah. This evening, I'd like to talk to you about the Anderson Ferry in particular, which is located in the northeast part of Boone County. It's been there operating as Anderson Ferry since 1817. The Ohio River is about 981 miles. It travels from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, southwesterly to Mississippi and Cairo, Illinois. And Boone County is located exactly midway along these 981 miles. There's been, as I said, several ferry operations along Boone County. Anderson Ferry is the one farthest northeast, and southwest was the one at Rabbit Hash, and then you have Bellevue Bottoms and the Petersburg Ferry, and East Bend Bottoms, they had a ferry, and Whooper Creek Bottoms, North Bend, Taylorsport, and there's several others that I've not mentioned that are noted on the map there. Thousands of years ago, there was a river that geologists called the Tiaz River, and it flowed down to where Licking River flows into the Ohio River between Covington and Newport, and then it spilled over and went northward where the Mill Creek is located today, and it formed a vast series of lakes, bodies of water, which circled western Cincinnati. And the geologists said that the only dry land going into this area was at Anderson Ferry, and that's where the early Native Americans would cross and go hunt and explore. And after the last glacier receded, the water spilt over and went westward to form what we know today as the Ohio River. Of course, back when the Ohio River first started, it was shallow and narrow, and even parts of the year when it was a dry time, you could even walk across. But with the development of locks and levees, and what we have today with the Markman locks, the newer locks that we have, the river's almost like a lake anymore, except when you have flood time. But when the white man first settled this area, they would follow the Indian trails. And of course, one of the Indian trails was at the crossing at the ferry, because it was shallow there, and because they used that as a hunting area also. There's been a lot of artifacts, arrowheads, and different things found at the ferry site, which are on display at the Cincinnati Museum. But Kentucky, at this time, was part of the Virginia Territory and was known as Fincastle County. In 1777, Fincastle County was broken into 3 different counties: Washington County, Montgomery County, and Kentucky County. And then in 1780, Kentucky County was broke into 3 counties, which were Jefferson and Fayette and Lincoln County. And then in 1795, Fayette County, or Campbell County, was formed. Out of Fayette County, Campbell County was formed. And at that time, Boone and Kenton County were part of Campbell County. And Boone County actually didn't come into existence until 1798. But during the Revolutionary War, different officers were given grants of land westward, and one of these people was William Peachey. And in March 13, 1784, Peachey was given 5,000 acres of ground near Dry Creek in Boone, which today divides Boone County and Kenton County. And he eventually hired a fellow named Raleigh Colston as his assignee to sell the property because he was getting elderly and couldn't do it himself. And Raleigh Colston eventually sold the 5,000 acres off into different tracts of ground to different individuals. And as I said before, Boone County was organized in 1798, and 4 years later, in 1802, the Boone County Court ordered that 4 gentlemen named Leonard Christopher, John Love, Samuel Glore, and George Anderson, and there was a 5th fellow, William Worrell, that the Boone County Court asked these gentlemen to mark the most convenient way from the courthouse to the mouth of Dry Creek. So this tells us that even at this time, that at the mouth of Dry Creek, it was considered a popular place for transportation. And this was 15 years before the official license was granted to operate a ferry, the Anderson Ferry. So it also tells us that there was a ferry there even before this date. But in 1817, Raleigh Colston sold 103 3/4 acres of ground and the ferry to George Anderson for $351.81. And Anderson operated the ferry and got a permit on March the 6th, 1817, to operate a ferry business. And eventually he bought the property on the Ohio side for the ferry landing on that side of the river. George Anderson was born in Maryland in 1765, and he died in Constance in 1839. And his wife was Sarah Brooks, and she was from North Carolina. But in the year 1800, it's said that Cincinnati's population was only half of what Boone County's population was at that time. But by the 1820s or 1830s, the development in Cincinnati began to take off. Of course, this was good for ferry business because a lot of people on the Kentucky side would want to take their livestock and such to market in Ohio and Cincinnati, or they might have jobs on that side of the river, which is the case even today. But in 1801, the Boone County Courthouse, they established the fare of a ferry boat at 9 cents for a man and 9 cents for a horse. Of course, this varied on the size of the animal. And people, like I say, would go to the stockyards and they'd take herds of livestock over there for sale. In the early 1900s, the automobile came along, and of course that today is our main business, is the automobile, and we have several foot passengers, a lot of bicyclists, and an occasional duck or raccoon might jump on the boat right over with. But we have had an occasion in the last 10 years or so. We had a Civil War reenactment. We took horses and cannon they had the north and the south reenactment of the Civil War. And we hauled them across on the Boone number 7. But today the fare for riding the ferry is $3 for for the car, and it doesn't matter how many people's in the car, it's still $3. And it's 25 cents if you walk on, and 50 cents for bicycles, and $1 for motorcycles. In 1865, well, I guess I'll say that Anderson's operated the ferry until 1841, and that's the last account of an Anderson owning the ferry. And it changed hands several times, about a dozen times. I have a list of the different owners on the table down here. But it changed hands about 12 times until after the Civil War. And in 1856, it changed hands 5 or 6 times. And it said that it was won one week in a card game and lost the next week. It was owned by a variety of people, and until 1865. And that's when a gentleman named Charles Cotmar bought the ferry, and his daughter, or his great-granddaughter, Ruth Huey, most of you are familiar with Ruth Huey, she told me that it was said that he was a stagecoach driver, and he had a problem with the dust. And the doctor told him he should get a new occupation, something that's not so dusty. So he bought the ferry business in March of 1865. And at this time, it was a horse-driven ferry boat. The horses would walk on they'd blindfold the horse, they'd walk on a treadmill, and then make the wheels, the paddle wheels, rotate. And when you get across the river, you'd have to turn the horses around and direct them the other way and walk the other direction to make the boat go the opposite way. Well, one day, Henry Cotmar told me the story that one of the horses broke their leg. And so Charles Cotmar thought that, there should be a better way of, better method of powering the ferry. So he decided to put a steam blower in the ferry. So 2 years later, in 1867, he built what he named Boone No. 1 after Daniel Boone, in a series of ferry boats named after Daniel Boone. He named it Boone No. 1, and he put a steam blower in it. And the first 3 ferry boats that he built, well, actually the first 6 were all wood, and they would build them upside down out of white fir, and then they'd pitch the bottoms, and they'd hire a derrick barge to come down and flip it over in the water, and they'd put the superstructure up. And the first 3 ferry boats they had never had a what we call wheelhouse or a pallet house or an elevated room where you could operate from. They were all operated from the deck level. They had a long keel rudder and had a steam blower. And the ferry boats would last about 6, 8, or 9 years or so, and they'd have to build a new one. And Boone No. 4 is the first one that had the pallet house, as we know it today. But all of the first 7 ferry boats that the Cotmars had were similar in their construction, and until 1937, and that's when they built the Boone No. 7 in Covington, Kentucky, and they put it in the water right after the Civil War. But I think it was 1964, Richard Cotmar and Duncan Huey bought a second boat, and they named it Little Boone. That's the pusher boat, and it pushes the barge that hauls the automobiles, and they named it Boone No. 8. And then in 1986 is when Debbie and we bought the ferry, and then 5 years later we bought a tugboat and an excursion barge and had them put together, and that's what we call the Boone No. 9 today, and the Deborah is the push boat that pushes the boat. An occasional repair has to be done once in a while, so we take the boats out of the water every 5 years and check the bottom and paint them. If there's any need for repair, we do it at that time. And the Coast Guard inspects the boats once every year. And today, it's 187 years since the beginning of the ferry business as we know it. George Anderson started in 1817, but the ferry still continues to provide a scenic route for tourists and families, and we're thankful for the Greater Cincinnati International Airport, because that's, with the ferry's proximity, that's what keeps us alive, is the airport business. We have a lot of crews that catch airplanes or work at the airport or in relation to the airport, and that's what keeps us going even today. That's basically all I've got. You got any questions? Anybody got any questions?
Question, how long did you guys have to close down when the river froze over?
Well, that happens probably about every 6 or 8 years, but in 70s, I think it was 77, 78, I think it was 32 days.
Was that long?
Yeah. When the river freezes over, we take the boats to the Ohio side, because as you can see, the river, when the ice breaks loose, it gorges and slides underneath, how it does, the ice does. You've probably seen pictures of ice gorges in the past, but anyway, in the bend of the river, the ice pushes up on the Kentucky side, and if the boats were over here, we push the boats up on the bank or tear them away. So we have to take them to the Ohio side and keep them free over there. Any other questions?
Do you ever have to close it down because of flooding? How high does the river have to get?
About 62 feet. It actually gets up on Route 50 and Route 8, just about right there. We run out of landing. But there are occasions when we do have to close down, weather-wise, high winds are a factor. And in high water, when it's real foggy, we don't run that either, because it's too dangerous. You can't see the trees coming at you. So.
Excuse me, Paul, do you have any idea of the width of the river today in reference to what it was in 1937?
Well, today it's about 1,800 feet, which is about 600 yards. And I'd say in 37 it was probably about 1,400 or 1,500 feet.
You had any scary moments?
Oh yeah, we've had lots of scary moments. Like
give us an example.
Occasionally we'll lose power, and might get a rope wrapped up in the propeller and go floating down the river until somebody comes to catch you. Of course, we don't. That doesn't happen very often at all, but that has happened. Yes.
What was the first boat that broke down?
It was probably Boone #1.
Do you have problems with the other boat traffic?
No, not really. We communicate with two-way radios and have radar. And they're very, 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 I have to say, just about every river captain you come across is very polite, knowledgeable, courteous. They even most every one of them, if they think about it, and they all usually do, they'll cut the wheel back when they go by, not to create a big swell that jars everybody, shake you around.
I didn't know if anybody realized that the young man who just asked that question is Richard Coppenheimer's great-grandson. And I just thought you might like this.
Yeah, there's a couple here, the Ellerbushes, and they're direct descendants. Well, Mrs. Ellerbush is a direct descendant of Henry Anderson, or George Anderson, the original one.
Are you a descendant also?
I think we figure well, I'm a cousin somewhere.
Oh.
Is there a lot of traffic on the river?
Yeah, actually, one of the biggest problems we have today is the pleasure boaters. And the later in the day it gets, and especially on weekends, they drink a lot. And you don't have a line in the middle of the road you have to worry about. And I'm surprised there's not more accidents than what there are. We have had some close calls with them. But they're not required to have an operator's license or anything.
Paul?
Yes.
You have 3 boats, you know.
Right.
How many licensed pilots do you have?
Well, let's see.
Include yourself, of course.
Let's see. Got 6 regular workers, and I got a couple I can call on in a pinch.
Stand by.
2 or 3 actually. Problem with most businesses, I guess most people have that problem, but I've been really fortunate with, I've got good help, and you couldn't run a business like that without good employees, and they're special to me. They're pretty special people. But like you were talking about operators, you can work for years developing somebody